I want to welcome to the pulpit today, Chuck Hagele. Have I said that right?
You said it correctly, Hagele.
Hagele.
Yeah.
It's German.
It's German.
But you're American.
I'm Canadian.
Oh.
And U.S.
Can I ask whose side you... No,
my mom's side of the family is Canadian. My dad's side is American.
You were born in America?
Born in America.
Okay. Whereabouts in America?
Greeley, Colorado, the stinkiest city in America.
Oh, this is stuff coming up out of the ground?
It's the largest feed lot in America.
Oh.
And so that's saying something. Yeah, that's saying something.
So you come from cattle country?
I was born in cattle country, but now I'm in the Pacific Northwest.
So where do you actually live?
I live in Washington State, just outside of Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, beautiful place.
Beautiful.
You're married?
Married now for 30 years last June, so 30, coming up on 31 years.
You look younger than that.
Well, okay, thank you.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Children?
3 kids, 17, and 15. Through adoption, we're able to get them all clumped up. Yeah, so 3 kids adopted from China.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So you're an international UN family.
UN family,
yeah, a little bit like my family. We're like that too. Yeah. Hey, what do you do for a living?
I lead a ministry called Project Patch. We're all about teenagers that are struggling in their homes. And so we have a residential program. Kids from all over the U.S. come and stay. Anything from 6 to maybe 14 months. Counseling, education, spiritual care, mentoring, really helping kids that aren't safe at home becoming safe again.
How long do those kids stay with you?
How long?
Yeah.
Average of minimum 6 months. Maximum could be maybe even up to a year and a half. But yeah, average.
And how do you fund that?
So, prayer. I'll just say that.
Simple.
A lot of prayer.
Yeah, fair enough.
Insurance, fees, and donations. Each year we're raising about $1 million so that kids can get care that can't afford.
Praise the Lord. Eh? What a great job. Yeah, let's give him a hand and a welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be with you this morning, and the rain is going away. I think we're counting on that, aren't we? I will say that people blame me because Washington State is full of rain, and so I'm sorry we brought it to you. This morning I want to spend our time together talking about this idea of longing to belong. When you look at children nowadays and adults, the dream I think that all of us have, this deep part inside of us says, I would like to be fully known and fully loved. Fully known and fully loved. That's the dream that we have, but what do we tend to experience on this earth? Hiding. Ever since Eve started hiding, we tend to hide. And that idea, if people truly knew me, what would they do with me? I remember a group that I was having, there was a session that we're having with teenage girls, and I asked the teenage girls, I said, how many of you believe that someday you're going to be loved, you're going to be cherished, and you'll be with a person till death do you part? Do you believe that's in your future? And a teenage girl, 14 years old, is sitting there, and tears are coming down her face. And she says, I don't think that there's anyone in the world that would be able to love me if they truly knew me. John 10:10 says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And for that 14, 15-year-old girl, he had robbed her of hope of love, hope of belonging, hope of purpose, hope of relationship. Do you sense that that's what we're living in right now? People longing to belong, but experiencing isolation, experiencing fear. We're going to march through this concept of belonging because as we do this, some of the questions that I think children ask over and over, and adults are asking this question, am I wanted? Is this a place that I feel comfortable? Do I belong? Am I safe here? Whether it's in the family, in the church, in the school, with friends, is this a place where I have a foundation of belonging? You know, belonging is interesting because the idea of, do I belong? Am I seen here? If I am here, do people notice? When you think about churches, I think that's a criticism that people get of a church. They say, I go to church and it doesn't seem like anyone even notices that I'm there, or the weeks that I'm gone, they don't notice that I'm missing. And so that heart of it is, am I seen when I'm there? The second part of it is, do I have a right to participate? Not only do I get to be there, there's some places where you can show up, but they tell you exactly what to do. You know, you have to show up in the way that we want you to show up. I think about kids. A lot of times when I was raised, kids can be present as long as they are what? Quiet, right? As long as you don't have a voice, as long as you don't annoy us, as long as you don't ask too many questions, you can be here. But what we're saying is to fully belong, there's that sense that I need to be able to participate. Beyond that, I need to be able to contribute. Me being here changes things. Isn't that amazing to think about? That belonging, it's not only that I'm wanted, it's not only that I'm seen, it's not only that I can participate, but when I'm missing, there's something missing from the group. I belong. So that foundation is there. You know, when you think about children, how complicated their lives, and for some of you, you're like, well, I'm not a child. Put yourself in the center of the circle. Write your name into it. We ask questions all the time of the relationships that are around us. For example, for our home, am I wanted in my home? In our extended family, am I secure in this extended family? I work with a majority of children in my care are under divorce. Parents separate. What happens when the parents separate to the kid and their extended family? There's rupture, isn't there? Relationships that were close because of dad and mom's choices. Do I belong in this relationship? Am I secure in that relationship? With friends, am I accepted? Am I accepted by my friends, by who I am? Have you noticed how many of you love watching teenagers and think they're a great sociology experiment right in front of us? I love it. Do you notice where teenagers part their hair? The girls especially. It's a center part, right? Do you know when that happened? Because it used to be a side part and somehow it became a center part and everyone does it, right? And then I love that teenagers all carry around water bottles nowadays. Water bottles. Did I say it correctly for you? Water. They carry around water bottles. When I was a teen, we never did that sort of stuff, but they all do that. And what I find interesting is that a lot of teens do things that their friends do because if they don't feel like they belong in that group. They feel a fear in that relationship. In school, what do I have to do to fit in at school? I find that it's interesting because some kids at school are the studious kids, others are the athletes, some are the actors, some are the musicians, some are the class clowns. But kids find their space in school for who their friends are and who they want to be. And then the question is, at church, do I have to pretend to belong at church? That's kind of a harsh question, isn't it? If I have a rough week, do I have to come and say happy Sabbath and smile in order for church to like me there? Do I have to put on a happy face and have all the confidence and faith every single week when I step into church? Or can I actually be myself and bring my doubts, my fears, my anxieties to church? That's an interesting question. And do you think that kids are coming up to the pastor and saying, do I have to pretend to belong in this church? Are they asking? How are they asking that question? Observing? They're watching. Okay, confession time. I remember when I was pastoring years ago, I was driving to church and there was this beautiful song. I don't remember who sings it, but it's like the sweet peace of God come over me, and it's a beautiful harmony song. And I was singing along to it as I was swerving around traffic, angry at people. Sweet peace of God come over me as I cut people off and as I'm angry, as I'm muttering. How many of you, like me, have had all sorts of family fights leading up to getting to church? You know, where some of the family's ready, some of the family's not ready, and people are taking their time, and by the time you get to church, you're all just not enjoying each other. And you walk through the door, and they're like, good morning, and you're like, good morning. Please take my kids to the youth division, right? What I have to say is that every time that our kids watch us pretend in church, they're learning that to belong in church, I better pretend. I better not be myself. I need to pretend. And so, am I included in my community? Do I fit into my community? You know, the question that in the States is asked is, am I safe in my community? Does my community look after my interests? So here's a lot of questions, and here's what I have to say is in some of these circles, they might be getting yes, yes, you're safe here, you're included here, yes, yes. With their friendships, they might be feeling yes, yes, yes. But as you go around the circle, what are they getting some of? No's. Yeses and nos, yeses and nos. And what I have to say is that when children feel insecure in belonging, they end up pulling into themselves. They end up depending less on other people. When they feel secure, amazing things happen, though, and I want to get into that a little bit. Okay, do I look like a rugrat? This little blonde child is me. And that's my brother David and Greg. I will say I'm the cutest. This is a picture taken, and just so you don't feel like we were super poor, my dad taught at a college in Japan, and that's our house, and they were moving campuses, and so all the preventative maintenance stopped on the homes while they built a brand new college campus. And so we went from this to a brand new house, and so it wasn't necessarily that horrible. But if you look at pictures of me, I was probably the only blonde child that lived for miles and miles and miles around. My brothers had a little lighter hair. I remember growing up in Japan where I could speak Japanese. I went to first grade, kindergarten, all those things in Japanese school. But physically, I was not Japanese. I could speak it, I could hang out, all those things. But I had constant reminders that physically I didn't fit into the culture. It became really apparent. Have you ever played any game of like hide and go seek? Okay, how hard is it to find the one blonde child in the whole province? Not hard, right? But the other kids. And so I grew up in an environment where I felt a lot of respect. In Japan was a safe country. I felt loved in Japan. I will say that in the 1970s, they'd point at us and say, "Gaijin da," pointing out the foreigner. And that wasn't a slur. That was just kind of like a wow. It wasn't surprising for me in Japan as a child growing up for people to want to take a picture with me. And so I felt special, but I felt different because physically I was different. So at 12 years old, we moved to the United States in Nebraska. Okay, and so if you know about Nebraska, Nebraska is the Midwest part of the United States. Everyone kind of looked like me. A lot of German people there, a lot of Norwegians. That was a place that everyone looked physically like me. I fit in, I blended in. But the strange thing for me is even though I blended in Nebraska, my thinking didn't quite work. I grew up with Japanese cartoons, not the U.S. cartoons. I grew up with Japanese songs, not the U.S. songs. I didn't grow up with the culture of the United States. And what I discovered really soon as I started going to school with all these kids that looked like me was that I still didn't fit in. I didn't understand the jokes. I didn't understand the nuance. I didn't understand. And one of the girls that I thought was super cute, her name was Dana. Dana said, "Why don't you just go back to Japan?" And I remember running all the way home with big tears coming down and saying, "I wish I could." But we were caught in a world in which I discovered that I wanted to desperately belong. But how do I belong when my physical might not match, or my culture doesn't match, or just the fact that I feel out of sorts? And I don't know about you, but as I tell that story, I think most of us can feel that same tension of, I really desired, I wanted to be in the circle, but at the same time, I wasn't. I felt insecure in my attachment to the group because there's something about me that was slightly different. And so you long for a place of belonging, but at the same time, how do you create a place that we actually do belong? Where our kids know that no matter what their skin color, no matter what their background, or no matter what their culture, this is a place that you're wanted. You're wanted. There's so many benefits of belonging that I think are really interesting. One of the benefits of belonging is just happier, healthier, more resilient. I really like that idea of resilient. What resilient means is if you have a basketball and you bounce it on the ground, what does the ball do? Bounce back, right? Bounce back. It holds its shape, it bounces back, you can bounce it around. If you take a chocolate cake and you drop it on the ground, what does it do? Smashes, right? Smashes. And so when I think about resilience, happy, healthier, more resilient, I think about all of us when we face hardships. Can we bounce back from it, or is it something that completely smashes us? And when we belong, there's something about belonging that helps us bounce back. A bolstered immune system, which protects us from stress and disease. Isn't that interesting to think about? In communities where we have more and more belonging, you can face different things. In the United States, when COVID came out, there was not an equal level of disease in different communities. There's certain communities that experienced more racism, that experienced more stress, that actually experienced COVID at higher levels. Why is that? Well, at least one of the explanations is that communities that are fighting for belonging, that have a lack of belonging, tend to have suppressed immune systems, get sick more. So for me, that idea of how do we bolster that? We get better grades for children when they feel like they belong. And part of that is that the human brain isn't that great at multitasking. Ladies here, you think that you're really good at multitasking. You're really not. You can switch your brain between activities faster than us guys can, but none of us can hold two things at the same time and do it well. And so when our kids are worried, there's a part of the brain called the cingulate that goes under where the mohawk would be, and that's what it gives us that hyper attention onto one thing. And so if a child is worried about their friends not liking them, what's the only thought they can think about? That. If a child is worried about dad and mom fighting, what's the only thing they can think about? That one thing. With adults, what's amazing is that we can actually kind of relax ourselves. We can actually send some signals and some response systems to our cingulate that'll say, okay, it's going to be okay. With kids, when that signal's sent to that part of the brain, it's like panic even more, right? And so when we look at that side of, do I belong? Am I excluded? Do I fit in? That part of grades, it's really hard to study when you're fearful about your belonging, when you have that insecurity about it. Build better friendships more easily. That idea that they build deeper friendships, connect more easily to others. Be willing to try new things. Yesterday we talked about that opposite of anxiety is that ability to go out and do things with confidence. And so we see that idea of belonging tends to make you reach out a little bit more. I'm going to illustrate that in a few more minutes. Be more social, which is so powerful, the ability to connect with people. And then be less excluded, less bullied. What we find is that kids that belong are less likely to get into relationships with people that use power against other people. They tend to be more confident. They bring more connection. So the consequences of not belonging. So remember that circle with all the things. If you have a bunch of no's to those answers, the consequences are more social awkwardness. Just that insecurity. Should I laugh? Should I not laugh? Should I wear this? Should I not wear this? Should I be here? Should I not? Should I be a friend with this person? Should I not? And so there's a lot of awkwardness and making choices and inconsistencies. Less exploring and learning, and I'll illustrate that a little bit more, but just a fear of doing those things. Lack of concentration, we already talked about that. Poor academic performance, increased risk of anxiety and depression. So the less belonging you have, the more depression and anxiety increase, and then the opposite of the positive is that you have that weakened immune system. So when you think about belonging, where do we sense belonging? Is it a substance? It's not a substance, right? It's a feeling, it's a security, it's a being. And so when we look at how God has wired our body together, we're complex human beings. Our relationships impact our health. Isn't that amazing to think about? We concentrate on so many things, but what we have to say is that if we can give our kids and each other powerful relationships, that helps us face the challenges of this world in so many ways. I want to give you an idea. For us as a youth program, we work a lot with attachment and trauma. We're certified in both of those things through Texas Christian University. TBRI is the name for it, Trust-Based Relational Intervention. It's this framework that really recognizes that for each of us since birth are going through the cycle that either builds trust or destroys trust. So at a basic level, imagine a baby. Some of you can probably still be holding a baby. Your baby has a need. How does the baby share that need? Cries, right? Do they politely ask their parents, if it'd be convenient, could you come change my wait, you call it a nappy, right? We call it a diaper. But, the baby doesn't ask politely, right? At a convenient time for the parent. The baby shares this need through a cry. Okay, confession as a dad, I never quite figured out the differences between my child's cries. Moms, I think sometimes like, oh, it's a hungry cry, or it's a sad cry, or it's a lonely cry. For me, it's just cry. So good for you if you figured it out further. But babies cry. And as the baby cries, acts out, here's the thing is that babies cry. What do toddlers do? They can scream, they can fuss, they can get kind of snappy, they can get irritated. What do teenagers do? Get sullen, get grumpy, get hangry. I mean, the interesting thing that we'll pull out through this thing is that what we see is all behavior is communication. All behavior is communication. And so that sharing the need is rarely done in a polite asking for it like a mature person was. I need some food. Could you give me some food, please? Or I need some comfort. Could you give me some comfort, please? Or no, it's expressed typically in some sort of behavior like crying or acting out. The parent meets that need. So it comes around that the child has a need, is communicated, the parent responds. The parent responds. Does the parent always respond correctly? I didn't, but you respond, and if that's not the right need, you're responding, but you're present. You're present with that child. And as you're present with that child, trust is developed. This happens over and over and over and over again. It's called the attachment cycle. This is what creates a secure attachment. So when you look at a child has a need, they express the need, the adult shows up, and the child learns about the world is that the world is a fairly safe place for them. It doesn't mean they don't have discomfort. It doesn't mean they don't have pain or needs. But as I have these needs, they're met. They're met with care. And that results in an attachment. What's the sad part about it is a lot of times you have the opposite of that happening. The child has the need just like before. The child communicates that need, and there's an attachment break. There's a severing that takes place. And that severing can be different things. It can be the parent just doesn't respond. Imagine you've seen this before, and I've done it before, so you've probably seen me do it, is if you have a child that's asking you for something and a parent is on their device, does the parent respond to the child's need? No. So the child keeps crying, or the child gets into a place where they just stop, either take care of themselves or just lives with the consequence, right? And so a parent not responding. Another option is a parent sometimes helps and sometimes they don't. Okay? And so the child learns that the world is inconsistent in how it helps me. Sometimes I'm going to be uncomfortable, and sometimes the parent's going to nurture my need. An unpredictable world. How many of you have a car that's unpredictable to drive? My daughter is working on her 1977 Honda Civic. When that car is done, it's a stick shift. It's a 1977 1200 cc motor. It's an old car. I'm hoping that she drives it knowing that when she wants to pull out into traffic, it will do it sometimes. Okay, occasionally, because that's not a sports car, right? It's a car that when you hit the accelerator, it may respond. And so if you're driving a car like that, how do you have to drive it? Carefully, anxiously, with lots of space, because you're not sure it's going to respond the way you want it. When you're not sure that your parents, caregivers, school teachers, pastors are going to respond, if they sometimes respond and sometimes they don't, what kids learn is that I better prepare to handle life on my own because I can't trust other people. The other thing that we see is that sometimes parents respond with rage, anger, shaming, sarcasm. The child is expressing a need, and the parent is annoyed or angry that the child has that need. Angry that that need comes up again, and the parent's triggered by it. And a lot of times we see this in homes, especially with addiction, whether it's alcohol, substances, those sorts of things, where the parent sometimes is really, really angry in their response to their child, and sometimes they're really, really kind, right? And that child is bewildered at that point. You know, is the world safe or is it dangerous? When I express my needs, do I get those needs met, or do I experience pain from asking for those needs? And each one of these attachment cycles results in something different. What we find at the really basic level of this, if a child develops distrust if they don't have those needs, distrust happens, and that attachment's hurt. It's kind of hard to read this, and I'll explain it a little bit more in the next slide. A lot of times, and as an adoptive dad, there'd be times that we study attachment and talk about it. There'll be a child with mom or dad just holding on to their leg. Let's just say they're at camp meeting here, and you're at the room, and the child's just holding on to the leg of the parent, grabbing the leg, and someone watching that might say, wow, that child must really be well attached to you, really connected to you because they're right there. And what we have to say is that if a child is clinging, that's most likely a sign of anxious attachment. They don't want to let go because if I let go, mom or dad might not come back. It's a fear response rather than a secure response. What you see with real secure attachment kids is that they'll grab onto mom, they'll check in with mom or dad, and then they'll go play with their friends. They might look over and make sure that their home base is still there, but they'll play around, they'll come get a need met, or they'll come check in for a hug or a pat, or just a did you see me do something neat, and then they'll go off and play again. Secure attachment means everything expands. They can be away from dad or mom. Avoidant attachment is that second one. I need to take care of myself. So they stop crying. They stop depending on a parent. They become self-sufficient. And that appears sometimes like, oh yeah, this child can handle the world. They're really brave. What we find with those kids is that they're a lot of times missing out on mentoring, connection, support, accountability because they don't trust the adults. And then disorganized, this is just pure chaos. A lot of the teens that we work with are disorganized, just like they experienced hot and cold from a parent. Some of the time they cling, some of the time they're on their own. They don't know what they need, but they know they really need something. And so it's a child expresses a chaos of emotions and behaviors. Some of it's attention-seeking behavior. I can do something really crazy and my parents pay attention to me. There's times that we have kids that they know that they can get a hold of their parents when they do something either inconsiderate for the parent or naughty or frustrating the parent, and they'll take that over silence. So the behavior becomes really, really extreme. When you look at all this mapping, and I don't want to get too technical on us, but you get into these different attachment cycles. At the very top, you have low avoidance. That means you don't avoid people. At the bottom, you have high avoidance. So low avoidance means connection more. High avoidance means that you're isolating. Clear on the right-hand side, my right, your left, is low anxiety, so feeling anxious all the time versus high anxiety on the right. So a secure is low avoidance of relationship, low anxiety. So secure, confident, safe, appropriate boundaries, comfortable, responsive. And that's really what we long for, isn't it? Can you imagine when people come to church, how do you want them to feel? Secure, right? That means that you have low anxiety being there and low avoidance of relationships. High anxiety, low avoidance, anxious, emotional, volatile, fears rejection. Going to the bottom side, that fearful. That fearful is that I don't want to leave dad or mom, so high anxiety, fears connection, poor boundaries, extreme responses, emotional, hot or cold. And then what we talked about, dismissive. Dismissive struggles with closeness, withdraws, overly independent, emotionally distant, unresponsive. Just so you know is that I just had the great conversation for my training of 2 hours with a psychologist doing attachment stuff, and I discovered that I am dismissive. That's the place that I live. I tend to handle stuff on my own, fear of expressing my needs, tend to avoid relationships, to avoid pain at times. And so when I'm at dismissive, what is my goal for me to do? Work my way towards security. But here's the thing, if I'm a dismissive parent, how do I respond to my kids' emotional needs? A lot of times I struggle because I have a hard time expressing needs, so when they do, it becomes uncomfortable. And so here's the thing with all these things is, yeah, identify your kids' needs, but identify yourself and then grow. And then grow. Continuing on, the more ways your child experiences belonging, the better they are prepared for the challenges of this world. And so when you look at the more ways, did you remember that last thing is a cycle? It's not we're not perfectly responsive to our needs or our kids' needs or our guests' needs or our church's needs, but the more yeses they get, the better they are. You know, what's interesting to me is that this isn't a new story. I don't know if you've read through the Bible recently. I love the story of David and Samuel when Samuel came to look at Jesse's sons. Okay, so Samuel came and he was a little afraid that Saul was going to find out, so he came under the pretense of having a large barbecue, having a sacrifice and a feast. And he shows up and he asks for Jesse's son, and he looks at the first one, and the first one looks kingly, right? And he goes through all the sons until they get to a point, and Samuel's like, "What's going on, God? You called me to this place to anoint the next king, and I went through no, 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 no. Well, I said yes, and you said no," right? That frustration with God. And then he asked Jesse, "Do you have another son? Do you have another son?" So where is David at this point? He's out in the field. He's out in the field. He's not even in consideration. Would you say that David is experiencing belonging or disconnection? Disconnection from the family, right? He's not even in consideration of the family's future. So David's in the field, and he's called in from the field. The description that they give of David is ruddy. Is that a term that you use in Australia? Ruddy? Ruddy? We don't use that term in the States. It really means sunburned. Sunburned. In Asian cultures and in even the Middle East, if you have darker skin, what is that a symbol of? The more darker your skin, the more likely you are to be a servant. Does that make sense? Lower the pecking order. The lighter the skin in the family, it means that you are in the tent, right? And so David's described as sunburned. Sunburned. I love the fact that David shows up to this thing, and expectations for David are next to zero, right? He's being judged on how he looks. He looks ruddy. He's judged on when he goes to fight the giant. What is his comparison to Saul when he puts on the armor? Puny, right? Not athletic enough. And then you look at different ways, and what I have to say is that David experienced othering. That's the term that we use. Instead of belonging, he experienced othering all the time. How do you look? How athletic are you? How easy is school for you? How easy is life for you? And if you get on the inside or the outside. But here's the question I have for you. When the world draws its circles of who's included and who's not included, does that circle match up with God's circle? I think a lot of us think that, okay, God will accept me when I can perform and sing like this person. God will accept me when I can preach like this person. God will accept me when I can. And we draw different circles of how we think God accepts us and how God rejects us. But what do we learn when we actually dive into Scripture? While you were yet sinners, what happened? He died for us. He redeemed us while we were still outside the circle. Here's the thing is that God's circle is way bigger than any of our circles, bigger than we can imagine. While we're still sinners, God drew circles of inclusion. When God says, "I've got talents for you," do those talents match up with what the world cheers on? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so when we're looking at belonging, part of what we're looking at is I love the fact that we need to ground our kids in Scripture, realizing that God's love, His belonging, His purpose, so many times is so different what the world is giving us. So many times. So I want to get practical with you. What can you do? My slides are a little different on my screen here. What can you do to help your child know that they belong? And I'd like to say, for some of you, you're like, "Well, I don't have kids." What I have to say is that these skills, they might be a little different, count for your friends, they count for your workplaces, they count for your churches, they count for your community. All these tools, show them that they belong. I think one of the ways that I love that people show each other that they belong, back a slide here, is if we have our devices, how do you show someone that they belong when you've got a device in your hand? Put it away, right? Turn off the television. turn toward them physically. We're going to be doing, well, I don't know if we're doing a session this week on communication, but that's one of the things is physically communicate with them with every tool that you have that I'm interested in what you have to say. Show them. I think it's interesting because in the world that we live in right now, in the past they say that the commodity that's the most precious is time. Have you heard that? I think that's true, but actually nowadays I think attention is even more scarce than time. We'll be together but not present. And what we have to say is that show them through every mean that you have possible that I am excited to be with you. I value our time together. I want to be present with you. And I think that's probably the biggest gift. A lot of times our kids are looking for examples of physically how do they feel important to us. And we can tell them all day long that they're really special, but do we show it? The other way that I like to say is that do we show them by our calendar? Does our calendar reflect our priorities when it comes to family and time together? And that's a harsh one for me because I'm gone right now. So do my kids perceive that? But do I check in with them? Am I connected with them? Am I showing that even when I'm apart that they're in my heart? That they're in my mind? That's the kind of thing that we're working on. We use honest affirmations. Affirmations are a powerful tool. So imagine that you've got a little kid at church and you walk up to that little that child that's wearing a bright red shirt and you say, "Wow, you're wearing a red shirt." Did I say anything about whether I like it or not? Next week, when that child's getting ready to go to church, what are they going to try to wear? Red shirt. Why? Because I noticed it. I noticed it. I gave energy to that, right? And so what we have to say is honest affirmations are energy being given to the child for who they are, what they're doing. When we see them do something really kind, giving energy to that. When we see them respond in a gracious way. For Project Patch, we have kids playing basketball, and imagine a kid playing basketball and they get walloped by another kid, just knocked down. Most teenagers, when they get up, they're ready to, especially our kids, strike back, right? And so we see a kid get up and their fist goes clenched and suddenly they give a big breath and then they run down the court. We'll find that child and say, "Wow, you got knocked down and it looked like it hurt. It looked like it made you mad. And you somehow pulled it together and kept playing the game. How'd you do that? How'd you do that?" Going from observing behavior, seeing them make that change, and then curiosity about how their brain is working, that's an amazing affirmation because you're affirming the behavior and you're getting in conversation about how it happened. And what I love about that is those kids start talking, really amazing things happen because you're affirming that behavior. And so what we have to say for the child is when they make steps of belonging, when they're making steps of connecting, when they're taking steps of being themselves, when they're doing things that are brave, when they're taking chances, when they're standing up against their friends about peer pressure, those are all things that we do affirmations for. Affirmations. Hey, I really appreciate you spending time with our family today instead of going with your friends. Thank you for that. Hey, thanks for checking in with me. It really feels great to know that you're having fun with your friends, and I feel better when I know you're safe. Those are affirmations that give us connection. You think about a church setting for affirmations. I'm so glad you came today. It really brightened up my Sabbath to see you today. I see you. Do you sense that? And that's so powerful. Why does it have to be true? Because if it's not, trust is broken. Trust is broken. Always tell your kids the truth. And we make that commitment to our kids, and we validate it over and over. Dad and mom will always tell you the truth. We might not always give you all the information that you want, but we will tell you the truth. And so our affirmations have to be that way, and it'll bring that security. We try not to do outcome affirmations, and so you're really smart or you're really pretty or those kind of things, compliments, mostly because what we find with most kids is that creates insecurity over security. When they're complimented for something like that, if you read, and this is an assignment outside of it, but when you look at any of the books by Professor Dweck called Growth Mindset, you'll read pages after pages about what happens when your kids have a fixed mindset over a growth mindset. Powerful stuff. We don't have time for it today, but please take the time for it. Another thing that we really encourage parents to do and churches is avoid othering. By othering, that's where you criticize or categorize another group of people and you talk about the differences. Identify a group that's inferior using like this us versus them type language. And the reason why this is because what we find is that as you talk about this, a lot of groups form, especially in the United States right now, groups are forming around the concept of othering, what we're against rather than what we're for. And so what we find is that as people join these groups, they feel secure, but then the rebound of that is that they start feeling insecure because all this hate that this group is directing toward this person could easily be pointed toward them. We start seeing acting happening. We start seeing people not being as true to who they are. And so what we say to families is, don't put down other families. Don't put down other people. Don't put down other religions. Don't spend your time putting and separating. Spend time connecting. When you talk about your neighbors might have problems, but serve your neighbors, care for people. Be careful how you talk on your way home from church about the other families that attended. Have you ever been with someone that they're just constantly criticizing someone else and you just wonder what they're saying when you're not there? Our kids are perceptive that way. And so if we're nitpicking and talking down about everyone else, what do they think about they're saying about them? Does that make sense? And so be very careful about avoiding, about othering people. I love this idea. Sorry, my slides are acting out. Help them discover that they're needed. When we talked about that idea of belonging is more than just thought. Belonging is a place where I can make an impact. And I love the idea that people depend on me. That idea that when I show up, good things happen, so we depend on one another. It gives us a chance to develop strengths, talents, personality. They learn new skills and confidence. The child learns leadership. I love to see churches where kids aren't just given like little tasks, but they're actually given a role to play in church that makes a difference. And not just a role that says, do it this way and you better do it this way, but a chance that gives kids a creative input. You know, a way to belong. And for us as churches, how do we get people to belong? Get them involved. Help make it their church. We also really focus on families developing an identity. What we say is that a lot of families focus on rules, and what we say is more and more focus on values. What kind of family are we? When you look at my family, you know, we say that we're the kind of family that helps other people. We're the kind of people that when we see a need, we step into that need. We're the kind of people that care for other people. That's the kind of family that we want to be. And what I love about kids is that as they do that work, amazing things happen. This morning at family worship, we talked about that basic verse of 1 John 4:18, perfect love casts out fear. And so as families serve together, as families care for other people together, as families do it in church, out of church, that results in fear being pushed away. As fear gets pushed away, what's replacing it? Trust, confidence, belonging. And so I love that side of it. Creating belonging isn't a one-time event. For any of you that are looking for an easy way of doing it, if you've had a child that's experienced disconnection over and over and over, what do you have to do? Over and over and over, respond in trust and care. Is that easy to do? Brutally hard work. But the fact is that work doesn't even come from our ability on our own to be able to do it. John 15 is a whole chapter that talks about the vine. And what are we commanded to do with the vine? Remain. Remain in me and I'll remain in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And we take that as a spiritual principle, but I think I want to tell you that right now, if you're working with anyone that's got an insecure attachment, anyone that's got a chaotic attachment, anyone that's got this dismissive attachment, what is the tool that you do? Ask God's power to flow through you into that relationship. Remain in God, saying, God, I trust that my behavior toward this person, my words toward this person, my action toward this person will be filled with your spirit, your power. Not my power, because my power disconnects me from people. But God, can you show up in a powerful way in this relationship? Can you help me be patient as this person experiences growth in trust? Can you help me meet the need beyond the behavior? Can you help me see that when this person cries out, that it's not an inconvenience, that it's a thank you that I have a chance to meet their need. Thank you that I get to be in their life. Thank you that I can respond. And God, please give me the power to do that. That's what we're asking God for. You know, I think as I look at this topic, right now, we talked about it at the very start, this idea that we long and long for a place that I can be known and that I can belong. What would it look like if our homes were that way? What would it look like if our churches were that way, our schools? What would it look like if we went out of our way in our communities to let people know that they're seen, they're cared for? Would that change things? We talk about evangelism a lot, don't we? And I love the idea of evangelism, soul winning. But here's the thing, what is the soul asking for in these people? It's longing to belong. And so as we reach out even to win souls, what are we winning? We're winning someone that's disconnected and bringing them into connection. Is that going to be easy? Brutally hard. Brutally hard, but that's the work that God calls us into. Church, let's be a place of belonging. Let's be a place of belonging. Let's not define ourselves by what we're against, but let's define ourselves by what we're for. In our families, let's focus on our values. Let's put action. Let's give roles and responsibilities. Let's see one another. And what I can tell you is that it will transform. It'll transform. You know, we've been doing this work at Project Patch for a long time, and what I will say is that as you see a child move from insecurity into passion for life, there's nothing better. There's nothing better. There was a girl in one of our videos, she records at age 11, she tried to drown herself in a creek. At age 11, and at age 16, she's discovering through Jesus Christ that her life has a purpose, and what she says is, I'm glad I didn't die. I'm glad I didn't die. And what I have to tell you is that the world is longing to be able to say, I am glad that I am in the family of God. I'm glad that I belong. I'm glad that you were patient with me as I learned to trust again. And God is in this work. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, we've been challenged this morning by what it means to belong. We know that there's some here that haven't experienced that. So, Father, I pray that you'll send your holy people into their lives that they can experience belonging. Father, for some of us, we know that our kids in our home are insecure. We know that this world is making them that way. Give us wisdom as we reach out to our kids that we might see them and that we might be able to affirm them, that we might be able to grow them, and that they know that they belong. Most of all, Father, we thank you that we can do this work because of your grace, because of your faithfulness, because of your love. And so as we go from here, Father, create safety for people, create our churches to be a place that people can connect, and most of all, give us the skills to be able to do that. We love you. In your name, amen.